Hello and welcome to another episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, allenwyma, and today I have a very interesting, amazing guest on our hands. And as a developer, and all you other developers out there, you know that we're not very good at UI, UX. And so it's nice to have somebody with a little bit of style and taste on the show and kind of give us some tips, right? So the episode's all about 6 tips for our next Flutter project. So we have a UX strategist. Is it Andrew O? How do you say your name?
O, like the letter O.
Andrew O, yeah. Sorry, I forgot to ask you before the show. Andrew O, who is a UX strategist based out of Canada, who's currently traveling in Taiwan. So as he's in his hotel room, he's making the best use of his time and still trying to get out there and kind of teach people how to actually do UI, UX. So why don't you go ahead and give a quick intro about yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. So my name is Andrew. I'm a UX strategist based out of Vancouver in Canada. And I help tech founders increase their SaaS company's revenue by improving their product and also by reducing their cost of support through design.
How do you actually do that, though? Can you give some more information about how that actually happens?
Yeah, so very, very simple explanation. When a user is using a product and they're trying to do something like complete a goal or a task, and then they're stuck because maybe something is confusing. Then when they're stuck, they have to call on support, right? They have to phone in or, chat with customer support. And then that is an implication on the cost of support. So that means someone has to, spend time and the resource to help them out, right? So when you actually look into these sort of support issues, what you find is, a common pattern where people are getting stuck. And then where sort of the costs are being spent on these support issues. And when you fix them, you get the benefit of improving the user experience, but also eliminating or reducing the support costs, which means more profit and revenue, basically.
But isn't it usually, as a developer, I always think about kind of costs and stuff related to like development time. Like, are you saying that UX people can actually help reduce cost?
Absolutely. Yeah. In a variety of different ways, actually. I think as we talk, like, what I tend to notice is like developers like to build, and no offense, but a lot of them don't like to talk to people. And it's kind of like that for me. I like to go in just spend hours in a silo and just doing design. But what happens is they spend all this time building something, and then they go out to the market and then find that it's not actually what the users wanted. So they spend more time building and rebuilding over and over again. And it's more expensive to have to tear things down and do it all over again than if you had done it by planning it out, planning it with design, and then getting it right the first time. So that's just one of the ways, UX design can help you save time and money when it comes to development.
Okay. When I think about UX, I just think about, how can the user actually use this app, right? I think it's kind of, I don't know. What I understand is like with the iPad, right? I think people usually say that there's no instruction manual, right? It's just give it to the guy and then he should just be able to use it. So like that just doesn't really translate to me. How UX can really save money. Like you said, like I think about, it's like, okay, just give the guy the product to kind of figure it out, or otherwise give him an FAQ or instruction guide. Isn't that not enough?
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. Like if you had to use instructions, right? That means the product is not intuitive, because if it was, you wouldn't have needed it. And it comes back to sort of the issue with the support, right? If the design is not optimal and you're trying to do something or complete a task and you're having trouble figuring it out, that means you have to then rely on support if you're stuck, especially, right? And then that just sort of means there's a cost of support to helping the user out.
Well, can you give some more kind of concrete things that a UX person could do or UX strategist can do that can really reduce costs? Do you have any like real life examples from your work?
Actually, yes, and I'll give you this example. Which is sort of the primary motivation that got me into this in the first place. So a couple of months ago, right, I was using my banking application, and I was trying to send money. So I spent all this time, setting up the transfers and things like that, all the details, and then when I hit the transfer now button, what happened was it showed me this message like we can't process this transfer right now, error 12345, right? A very generic error code. And I couldn't understand that. I didn't know what was wrong, and I needed to do something. I needed to get my stuff done, right? So what happened was, because I didn't understand, and I needed to send money, I had to call on customer support, right? And the whole time it took me half an hour to wait, but it also took the agent half an hour to work through the issue because he wasn't familiar with it. So, the total time we spent on that was like an hour. And what he had finally figured out was I had reached my transfer limit. That was what that error code meant. I had reached my transfer limit. And in order to send more money, I have to wait until next week, right? So here's the thing, like user experience, what UX designers do is copywriting is also a part of it. So if we had made that copywriting clear from the first place, instead of saying a generic error code like error 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, if it had said something like, you reach your transfer limit of 7,000 a week, for example, please, you'll be able to transfer more money next week, right? If that had been clear, I wouldn't have needed to sort of wait for half an hour and then, get on the phone with the support agent for another half an hour, right? And you'd also imagine, if this happens quite frequently at a call center with, let's say, 2,000 employees or 1,000, and if this is even like less than 1% of the issue, right? It can still add up because it's happening frequently, and you're spending money on it months after months or year after year, solving the same problem or telling users the same thing, that they've reached their transfer limit, right? So this is, if you look into, where these issues are coming from, where this cost of support, frequent problems are, you can actually look to reduce the cost. And when you reduce that, you actually also improve the user experience of the product as a whole.
Yeah, I agree about that. I actually didn't think even about like text being a user problem. I mean, to me, it's just like, as a developer, I think if somebody told me, hey, I'll put the error code, and I said, well, the error code's code 1, 2, 3, I don't think it's going to be very useful. I'm sure, that would be my first thought. The guy would probably say, well, then if they call in and ask for support, they would tell me the code and then I can tell them what the issue is. But to me, I would be like, well, that seems like a waste of time.
Exactly.
But, you think most developers would just kind of leave it at like, okay, the requirement is this, so then just do this. And that's why they would need somebody like a UX strategist to take a look at this.
Yeah, I think developers think about how to build things, but they don't necessarily think about things from the user's perspective. Whereas, UX designers are all about the user's perspective and making things clear to the user, and making sure that they have a good experience without friction when they're using the product.
So what's between a UX designer and a UX strategist? Because it sounds very similar. I think a lot of people in UX want to make sure that people can use product, right? Is that where the UX kind of is the same in that case?
So I think UX design is more about sort of just the design aspect of things, right? The execution part of it. Whereas UX strategist, well, it's going sort of one step above, and it covers a more wider view of things, such as like planning, influence on the way the company practices design, influence on, how to go about design strategy, and also like, design planning, the way design should be practiced. So it's sort of influence on a higher level, if you will.
Okay. Higher level. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So you wouldn't necessarily be making like, all these different kind of UX components, right? You'd be kind of looking at the system as a whole and saying, does this actually make sense? Does the error code, does the error message actually resonate with the user and make it clear what they need to do, if anything? Mm-hmm. Right?
And it's also like, asking the right questions. So, if someone had come to me for say they want to design a project, right? Instead of just saying, let's just design it, as the way you wanted it. Really have the question, like, what's the goal of this redesign? Like, what challenges are you having? What problems are you facing? What's the goal you're trying to reach with this redesign, right? So it's also a lot about high level asking the right questions, whereas UX design is more about the actual like execution work, right? Like now we know what we're doing. It's just a matter of doing it. So that's where I sort of see the difference is.
UX designer would be more looking at the individual components and making sure all that meshes well and it's very intuitive, right?
Mm-hmm. I think a simple way to look at it is UX strategist is about the direction of things, whereas the UX design part is the execution part of it.
Okay. So how does a UX strategist actually start to work on a project? Like, is it just really from the beginning, like, I want to actually understand what you're trying to do and and why you're trying to do this, and then like who's your audience, right? Is that kind of the way you start to look at it?
Yeah. In a way, yeah. So, when a client comes to me for a project, they're usually thinking like, yeah, we need to do this, we need to redesign this, we need to make this sleeker or better or nicer looking and things like that. But then, I think where the value is then asking them the right questions, like why are you redesigning this? So what are you trying to achieve from this new interface or new experience or new product, or like what sort of problems are you facing that led to the redesign? And then once we, diagnose the actual problems and we know what the goals are and it's clear, then we can move forward to then actually doing the design from end to end. So that's sort of how the process goes. You don't just, the client comes to you and say, we need a redesign. You don't just say, yeah, okay, let's just design it. That's typically a recipe for a disaster.
So where would you typically like kind of stop your work at? Like, are you, because I'm trying to think about in terms of delivery, what would you actually be delivering to your client? Is it like a written thing, or is it like a sketch, or how would you kind of deliver what you think should be done to this product?
It usually comes out in the form of, let's say, like a design file, either Figma or Sketch. But it's end-to-end screen. So like, let's say, you're designing an app and it's got like screen from point A to point B, like start to end of the journey. And it's got all these sort of like, what do you call it? Different states, exceptions, for example, error screens. Let's just say, if we're talking about like a login screen, you have like login, and you'll have like screens showing the login, showing the errors, what happens if you type the password wrong, what happens if you type the email wrong. It'll describe this in like a very high fidelity from end to end, so that it's very, very clear for the developers, and that there's like nothing that's missing. And then, so then when they use it, it's pretty much a smooth process.
So you really deliver. So then you're not just, because I'm just trying to think like, if you're a UX strategist and you had a UX designer with you, mm-hmm. Of course you have to work together, right? So kind of like, where would the end of your delivery be in that case?
Well, I deliver the entire project. So I provide directions to the designer who's working under me. And then, together we deliver the end-to-end high fidelity screens.
Okay. So you're also doing some actual UX design too, in terms of kind of those pieces.
Yeah. And the majority of it is sort of like the high level, finding out what the actual problems are. And there might be some, screen designs for sure, but it's mostly on the high level stuff.
Okay. So, but I mean, back to the main topic, right? You are coming here with like I said before, developers don't really understand UX, right? Mm-hmm. We just understand how to build stuff. You tell us to build this thing, we pretty much pixel for pixel do our best to try to make that thing happen, which is probably, it's good and bad, right? Depends on what that thing is. Mm-hmm. Because, as screen sizes, things like that, they may change, right?
Yeah.
But you said you have some tips for us, right? Should we start to knock off those tips now?
Yeah. So I've got like 6 tips and 1 Mythbuster. So yeah, I'll go through them. So the first tip is be obsessed with your users, right? And, it comes back to what I mentioned before, like developers like to build things and sort of do things in their silo and then not talk to people and just spend all this time, coding up stuff. And then they go to market, right? And then finding out it doesn't work. Because I've seen that so many times, like developers spending all this time building this product, but they haven't talked to any people. And then when they actually show the product to people, it's not actually what they wanted, right? So it's important to really talk to the users and think of it like you're engineering. I mean, a good way to make this sort of fun is if you think of it as a problem you're trying to solve. Just it has to involve a little bit of people, right? And meaning that like you're trying to engineer what the users actually like, what they're willing to pay for, what they don't like, right? So that part's really important.
So be obsessed, right? Like how obsessed do we need to be in terms of like, because I could get pretty obsessed with stuff, especially when it comes down to writing some code.
Yeah, like you need to, well, the sort of like the world's leading tech companies like Amazon is like super, super obsessed with their customers. So, you want to be, obsessed. But enough for you to get a clear understanding of what you're actually building and who you're building it for. I think that's a a good compromise.
But actually, so here's the thing. Like I working with a designer recently. Most, I don't know about most, but definitely some designers say that they're UI and UX, right? And I'm aware that there's a difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting part is I don't think she was obsessed as I think that you recommend to be. Now, the reason I say that is because when we're going through some initial designs for what we think would be good for the client, she put in two things which the guy said he didn't want, which was, but of course she found out after, right? Because when he presented, he said he didn't want it. Like specifically, he said we don't delete stuff, and she put a delete option in there, and that's fine, right? But when she went to do the second revision, she actually presented the same thing, and she gave a delete option again.
Yeah.
Like, so in this case, would you say that she kind of violated the obsess problem?
Well, I would say, like, if you had talked to users and then found out whether they liked it or not, whether they needed that function or not, it would have been, a very important case. So, like, I guess the question is, did she actually speak to the users or do some user testing to sort of challenge whether that...
Not user testing, but she presented the designs, and he said, oh, no, we don't delete anything. And then when she went to deliver the final one, she still kept the delete part in. So, like, I think her obsession maybe was too much like, okay, I know what he wants and he wants this, even though he said he didn't want it. That's kind of the way I was looking at it.
Mm-hmm. And was that a client or?
Yeah, it was a potential client that we're pitching to. It's nothing against her, right? Because, I mean, as a developer, I also have my opinions. But I think after some time, I started to realize, hey, listen to the client. If they say that they never delete stuff, even though you think you should let them delete, just giving an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they say they don't do X and, make sure to figure out why is it they don't do X. And actually, if they have a good reason, then make sure that you keep it out, right? Because it just doesn't fit for them, right? That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, and the part where where the users play in is if that person had talked to users and, let's say 90% of them say, yeah, we actually really do need that delete button, then that makes a really good case to keep that in there. And then going back to the client and say, we've actually talked to your users, and they really want this. So would you please reconsider,
Well, in this case, the client was the user. He was the only user, actually. This is a very custom-made software just for him to use. So in that case, yeah. I think it was just a problem of just information overload. Like, I'm not here to make fun of people or to kind of poke fun, but I think I wanted to kind of talk about, hey, maybe she was obsessing too much that she thinks that, things that she thinks would be good to have actually didn't really make sense for that particular case, right? Which happens.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see, really have to see, what sort of the context and background, that's involved in that particular part of the app.
Yeah. I think this is maybe, just kind of presuming that, hey, it's typical to delete things, right? But I think some people don't realize that if you delete something in business, you could delete the wrong thing and you may actually want that thing back. So it's better just to archive it than to delete it. Something like that.
Yeah. And that's potentially a better solution.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, sorry. I think obsession is good. But maybe when you obsess, still try to keep the user in mind, right? Like you said. Obsess, but don't try to presume things maybe from your obsession. Yeah. All right, what's tip number 2?
Okay, tip number two is navigation. Keep it simple, right? Keep it simple. So, when it comes to building an app, consider the way that things are done is usually you typically have 3 to 5 navigation items on the bottom, and think about how to structure that to make it easy. So think about keeping one for the main page or maybe one for the settings, and then there's other things that go in between. And I know you mentioned last time when we talked hamburger menus, right? When they come up and things like that. Don't try to fit it all into the hamburger menu. That's sort of the reason why it doesn't work. Think about, the architecture of your app and present 3 to 5 super clear navigation items that you think the users want and need, and then just simply lay it out, right? That's sort of the basics when it comes to navigation.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Okay.
Try to put everything into navigation, you're saying.
Well, try to figure out, what your top say top 3 to 5 pages are in your app, and then make sure they're laid out clearly. So what you don't want to do is, fit everything into one navigation. Let's say, there's 3 pages that users constantly need to go to. Don't try to fit them all into like one single navigation item. Right? It may be best to break them out into 3, or even more, depending on what they are.
Does this also relate to like if we have a table of data that we need to really be careful about how much data we're actually going to show to? It seems like a very similar kind of thinking, no?
Can you elaborate more on that?
All right. So normally, if you have a lot of something, you want to put that into a tabular format and just like the most important data that you really care about at top. And if you want to know more, then you would click into it or tap into it. And then you would have an expanded view of that information for that particular record.
Okay.
That's usually what I think about. But then at the same time, like to play devil's advocate, there's also quite a lot of clients that I do have that do want, 50 columns on a single like index page where we'd show all the information.
Yeah. Well, I would actually, take a look at what is it that the user need from that perspective before deciding on, laying out the 50, because I don't think anyone would like to be overloaded with that much information.
You would think so, but honestly, just from 2 clients in particular, I questioned them, and they both said they wanted that, and when I delivered that, they were very happy. So I know, that's why I always stop it. Are you sure you want to see all? It wasn't actually 50 columns, but it was enough that it was like the menu was very long. So I had to figure out how I can scroll horizontally on the app, for a mobile app. And it wasn't very intuitive, but that's what they wanted. They just took their phone, flipped it sideways. And they liked being able to see one thing and just seeing all the information without having to tap and reload.
Were they the users of that app?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that might be a good case then.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's kind of like almost like a, what do you call it? What's the word for that? It's a violation of that second rule, right? Which is don't try to overload, like the navigation, don't try to overload information into one piece, if I understand correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the thing is, design, with UX design, things are never just clear black and white. I think it's sort of like a mixture of a bunch of different things. And, there's always rules that can be broken and things like that. So it's never black and white. In this case, the clients who are also the users are very happy with what they got. Then, I think it doesn't make sense to remove all of the things that they want just for the sake of making things simple.
So I think a moral of that story would be, if the user is happy, then you did a good job, no matter how much more improved you think you could be. Is that right?
To an extent, yeah. But usually, it's never like, usually when the users are happy, it also means like, the app is fairly easy to use and fairly clean and easy to consume. So I think when with that particular case where they wanted like all the 50 columns or things like that, that's a pretty unique scenario.
As I said before, I get that request more than you think, which is the interesting part. And again, I'm like you. I'm like, do you really need to see all of these fields? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I always get back. Yeah. Okay. Oh, this is perfect. Thank you. This is exactly what I wanted. All right.
Yeah. And that, if they are the users and they're happy, then sure. I would say, if that serves the case, then yeah, go for it.
All right. How about number 3 for your UX tips? Yeah.
When it comes to like designing things like pages and things like that, just make sure you have super clear headlines. Like instead of like having like a really long sentence of things you cram in a headline, just make it clear and simple. And that's because like most people don't read. So if you're having like this paragraph, right, and you're expecting people to read it. Most people don't. Instead they scan. So if you can, in a way, summarize, a paragraph content in a clear headline, so that the users can understand it from the first glance, that's what you want to aim for. Yeah, and it really saves the users time, so that they don't have to spend all this time reading things like that, and it makes it clear to them what the page is about and what they have to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think make it more visual, more intuitive, rather than a long explanation about, okay, first you tap this, then you do that, and if you want to do this, like less text, more visual aids, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. But the sad part is that most people could just kind of think about how they can properly do that. Do you know of any like simple ways to actually make that some of these kind of more easy things more like how do you say that more? How can you make things more intuitive when it comes to this kind of problem? Is there I guess for instance you could say like, okay, if this is a save button, you can just put like the floppy disk icon maybe.
Yeah. So let's just say, since we're talking about save, let's say if you're on a page where, I don't know, you're filling a long form, for example, and it instead of having a paragraph describe the entire thing, like please fill in this form, blah 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 blah, and it just goes on and on and on. Just have a super clear headline. Let's say like enter your details or something, so that when the user reads it, they know, okay, this is what I have to do, right? So if you're looking at from the other way, a good way to know you're doing it right is if you can read that one line and know exactly what it is you have to do. So if you find yourself writing a super long line of instructions and things like that, just take a step back and think of how you can summarize it into one single line. And then present that. And then that will help you, come up with a really clear headline that people can understand.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point. Or I think there's like, some things I do see is like if the form is very long, there's like a floating, bouncing kind of arrow to kind of let people know, hey, keep going, this kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Is there anything else you think that would be very kind of like an easy one for people to kind of have this idea, so use less text and more action for things that are very normal?
I think when you mention that scrolling thing, I think it's pretty intuitive to scroll, right? Well, but what do you actually mean though?
Sometimes, like for a device, the page will become, how do I say this? It may look like you're done, but actually you need to keep scrolling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can have an iPhone 12 mini versus iPhone 12 Pro Max, right? You're going to have different amounts of screen real estate. So it's going to look different on different devices. And so sometimes on a maybe a smart device, it may look like you're already done. And then you may say, okay, what's the next action? Well, you have to let them know, actually, since this card is actually bigger than you can put on the screen, you need to make sure that you actually scroll down, right? How can you let people know, right?
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes I've seen, and again, all these design rules are not so black and white, but one of the things I see is when you have a form, for example, like a long form that requires some scrolling, sometimes if you fix the button, people don't know when they actually get to the end, right? And that becomes a problem. So what you want to do in that case is make sure to place the button at the bottom, so that when people scroll, they're looking for like the next call to action, instead of just thinking they're done, filling out these forms and then clicking the button and then finding out they can't complete it for some reason.
Oh, yeah. Oh, like the one thing I really hate, I ran into that today with something. Oh, I was actually ending some contracts on Upwork from, like, I hired these guys like 3 years ago, paused the contract and never came back to it. And then today I was looking through it and I was just ending the contract and I have to give feedback. And there's so many different boxes. I end up skipping it because you don't have to answer all. So I skipped a couple that were required. I hit end, like submit, and it said, you need to complete the thing. And I'm like, well, what the heck did I not complete? I had to keep scrolling up and down so I could find it because I was just in no mood to like check every single input. So I'm looking for a very clear visual indicator. Maybe what would have been good for that situation is you tap it, you let them know for a brief second, hey, you didn't finish it, and then quickly scroll up automatically to like the very most top thing I need to fix, and then let them scroll back down and skip anything else. Something like that could have been nice.
Yeah, that's another pattern actually. So when you're doing, filling out the form and you're missing these things, tapping on the button can actually, bring you up to where you missed the inputs. And then that's useful for highlighting what you missed instead of you having to dig through that. So yeah, it's a good pattern.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of patterns, right? And I guess finding the right pattern is also about finding the right branding that you have, right? Because you can't do certain patterns based on the branding or the audience. Is that true?
What's an example? What do you mean?
Well, I mean, here's a very good example, right? Let's say that you have an app that's made for people who are older. And now I'm not here to pick on old people or seniors or however you want to say it, or, people with people of age, however let's say it.
Mm-hmm.
But even for myself right now, sometimes I have a problem trying to focus on small things, right? It just happens. I'm getting older. Yeah. And so maybe having buttons that are very small don't really make sense, or having text that is too small doesn't really make sense. And also, you need to make sure that you also have text that can handle becoming big, right? Because usually you don't run into this, but depends on your audiences. But actually, I had a developer here who worked with me. He's the only developer that I've ever met in my life that actually like makes the text 3 times as big on his device. Wow. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Like I don't imagine that, right? Like when I go through testing and stuff, and I go through all this stuff, I never think about testing for people who like, make the text bigger in the app. And he just happened to need that for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. I actually noticed that, in a lot of like older people, when they always like to see like super, super big text. And as people get older, I think that's because it just becomes harder to read the smaller text. But back to your question, I think the users should always come first. Like you should always not have these limiting guidelines that prevent better usability. So if something like let's say a big button is against for guidelines for whatever reason, I think the case should always be that, you should have it because it makes it easier for the users to press instead of being bound to these guidelines, which make it hard for the users to use the product.
I'm sorry, I'm still thinking about the big text issue. Do you think it's always good to maybe always check the text resizing part for every single design? That could be very tricky. Yeah.
That's where a sort of accessibility comes in. And I think most people forget about accessibility. But, I don't know exactly the stats. But to your point, I think, a good general guideline, if you want your design to be accessible, is to make sure that they do fit with these big texts come in.
So do you actually make that part of your checklist if you actually go to every single client and make sure that they have accessibility down?
In some clients where the accessibility is required, yes. Yeah, we do have these patterns that are accessible. So, yes.
Okay. Yeah, not all. I mean, I agree. But every once in a while I kind of run into a situation where like people do talk about it and they say, oh, actually, I am. Like recently, some people were promoting an app that they did that's distributed around the world in real time and all this kind of stuff. It's all about like uploading MP3s and then like playing them in sync with your friends. And a developer said, oh man, the app, it's really cool, but I can't really use it because I'm actually blind. So it's difficult for me. So I'm going to actually work with the developer to make sure that this thing is accessible, at least to people like me. So it's pretty powerful.
Yeah. Accessibility is a big part of UX design. And a lot of, I think more and more websites are becoming more accessible, and especially like, government ones, and banks, like accessibility is super, super important. But not everyone, factors that in when they're, making their website or apps and things like that.
Well, accessibility returns to disabilities, right? Because a lot of things are just not accessible in a bank UI, to be honest. Yeah. It's always difficult to find anything in a lot of these banking websites, I think.
Yeah. Well, no, I would actually say, I think banks are the ones who have to care about accessibility, and it comes in a number of different ways. I'm not a super expert in accessibility, but for someone who's for example blind, the code has to be coded in a way to read the text in a certain way, and allow them to use their keyboard to complete what they're doing. Yeah, so it's not entirely like visible to us.
So now I'm starting to think maybe I should actually be using the website with a screen reader instead of having to use it with the normal mouse. Seems really annoying.
Yeah, that's a good way to check whether your website's accessible or not.
How about the next step? Is it number 4 already now?
Yeah. So number 4 is reduce the amount of input, right? So a good rule of thumb is like good design is like super, super, like the best design is, if you don't have to interact with it, like it gets what you need to do, it gets done without you having to do it, right? So if you're designing, for example, something that has like a lot of forms or input fields, for example, think of a way to like pre-fill them and not have the user to spend so much time filling it out. because the less effort a user has to do what they need to do, the happier they'll be, right? And I'll give you this sort of example. So I was trying to sign up for this like cryptocurrency app, and it got me to fill out sort of my country and the time zone. But the thing is, like, when I filled out the country, it didn't automatically detect the time zone, so I had to do it again, which was kind of annoying, right? So there's just some tips to keep in mind. Reduce the inputs when you can. Like, think of ways to make it easy for the user to fill in the form, or even like autofill it if you can.
Yeah, that's definitely a good way to do it. But the only issue is sometimes in order to actually do that, it is quite a bit of effort. So you have to consider effort versus convenience, right?
Yeah. And I will say, like, the more effort you guys do from the development end, the less effort there is on the user, which is a good thing. So, there is that trade-off, but you always want to aim for, the least amount of effort from the user.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like right now I'm working with a client, and we actually asked for a lot of information because we have to do a lot of checking in terms of, is this guy the actual legal owner of this company? Does he have the access to do what he wants to do? Is this company actually valid? Is it actually still open? Is his address even real? So many different checkings, and we're actually trying to find ways that we can say, okay, give us like this number and then maybe some other information, and we can somehow grab the rest from other APIs. So we're definitely studying that one, but it's really tough, especially in the un-United States of America. Not saying that, US is not good. I'm American, but every single state has their own thing. That's why it's called United States. Okay. Not USA is one thing. We're all basically different states that somehow work together. And that's the tricky bit, right?
Mm-hmm. But can you imagine if you actually, we're able to get to a point where all you have to do is fill in one thing, and, it'll just pull out all these data and just be done with it, right? Wouldn't that be like an amazing user experience for you?
Yeah, it is. But what else is another experience, right? So I like to play devil's advocate, as you can see. Like, okay, it would be great as the user, and I would be happy to deliver that experience. But like, let's say, like, I don't know how reliable other people are giving us the right data. That's the other part, right? Mm-hmm. Like, if you turn in your information, you get a new number. Do we actually have the latest number? Like let's say you give number A, but we actually also need number C, but we can get that from, like, giving us the one number, then we can trace it through. Like, what about that problem, right? There's a lot of things that come in, right? So it's I agree on that side, but I also think about the other side. Like, what if something just from somewhere is just not quite right? We need confirmation on that.
Yeah, but you're at least one step closer if you pre-fill everything, and then you can do some double checking as opposed to then having to fill everything out, right?
Yeah. Then if you ask them to fill everything out and they give everything right the first time, it'd be good. But then more things to fill in, the more likely something will be wrong or missing. No.
Depends, I think.
Yeah. Well, if you're asking for like all kinds of different IDs, because you have the different ID for this, ID for that, so it happens. So, but okay, yeah. I mean, so basically, think about each input and try to use as less as possible to get all the information that you need. Is that kind of a good tip? Yeah,
and also even sometimes even think about worth thinking about is, like, do you even need those information? Right? Because back to, like, when I was signing up for that app, like, did it really need to ask for my time zone at that moment? Right? I think it would have been better if I didn't even need to provide it. So yeah, I would say, like, think about how make it easy for your user, of course, but also think about, like, whether you actually need it or not. And if you didn't need it, it's even better.
Yeah, less inputs, but trying to grab more data for the user, making it as easy as possible for them to put their input in.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty clear. How about your next point?
Okay, next point is a clear call to action. So, and this is part of this is really comes down to the design, right? So when you're making your buttons and things like that, try to make it clear. And clear, I mean, give it a clear color, with, let's say, white text. And the way it should be done is, like, most of your the page should be, like, I don't know, if your background is like white, most of the page should be white. And then you have a button that's like your primary and secondary button. And primary button should be, give it a color, give it something that, it can easily stand out from the white background. It could be like blue, red, or orange or something, right? And then make sure the copy on the text is a clear call to action that says like next, continue, or submit. Just so that users can, if they're scrolling through a page, they can really see what's the next thing that they have to do, or where the buttons are and what they have to press.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So you really advise about having like a white background with black text and then like a red or a blue, some kind of standout color for like that primary color to make them move forward, right?
Yeah, and that also goes for also dark UI. So where the background is black and you got white text, but you can still use like a different color, like the blue button, red button, orange button, as long as it stands out. Works in both black and white user interfaces.
Isn't there some websites that you can give them some colors and then they can give you some like other colors that can match those or something?
Oh yeah, I think you're talking about like Adobe Cooler or something. That's really that's really a whole different thing though. That's a whole different thing because on your app you really don't want to have like 5 different colored CTAs. You want to stick to sort of one main thing. And then I think that colored wheel kind of thing is more for your branding as opposed to the buttons. For the buttons, you want to keep it like super clean. One color.
But I think the hard part is like if your primary color is red, what kind of color would you choose for something that's kind of destructive, though?
So the thing is, I don't think that's an issue because, for example, HSBC, and I worked at HSBC, their primary button is red. And then, people understand that the brand is red, the button's got to be red. So, we don't really, when I was there, we don't really run into any issues with having a red button. And if there are error messages, like, those are usually like the destructive things that, they appear at the top. So they don't really sort of have an influence or they don't really impact the red button being red.
So if you were to actually delete something and you had like a pop-up, you would say you still use the red button for the positive outcome. I guess I want to delete this thing or.
So I would say it's don't think of it as like a positive or like a bad or positive outcome. Think of it as a primary thing you want to do, right? So if deleting something is actually something you want to do, it may not necessarily be bad. And it's the primary action, so it makes sense to use like a red button in that case.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I just so used to like things like Bootstrap. They always have like this kind of error color that they kind of want you to use, and I think that makes sense. So like at the time, like I had to like figure out, hey, what color can we use to make this kind of destructive action, But okay, makes sense. Okay,
yeah.
How about your next tip?
Okay, next tip is simple. It's just test it with your users. When you're developing your app, make sure you test it with your users. Like go to them, ask them to run through their things, run through the main journey that you've developed for them. Just give it to them and ask them questions like how do you feel about using this? Like where did you feel like you're stuck? You get a lot of good insights when you do that. And tell the story of someone I was talking to like a couple of weeks ago. He was also like a developer, and like the stereotypical one who spent all this time building his own app and things like that, and didn't go talk to any users. And then what happened was he was finding that a lot of users were dropping off once they downloaded his app. And I asked him, like, have you actually gone to users and showed them your app and asked them what they think? And he said no, right? And then that's why, right? Because he's assuming what he's building is what they wanted, right? So then I suggested to him, like, go take your app, show it to you, go talk to your users, right? And then when he did that, he came back and he told me, like, he got so much clarity just from talking to the users. And then that was really helpful in helping him find the direction in sort of what he needed to build, and also gave him a lot of clarity on, what he was doing and if he was heading in the right direction or not. a lot of times what we like to do is like we like to build and not test with users. And sometimes we think we're right. Like we don't need to test it because it's so obvious. But I would say you're always going to be surprised in what you find. And when you speak to talk to your users and you get their feedback, it can be quite exciting. And, it's always very, very, very insightful.
What has been like one of like the most surprising results that you've gotten when you actually tested some ideas out?
I think like with one of my previous projects, I can't remember the exact details, but yeah, like I can't remember like the exact details, but general theme is like when I test something or show them, I'm always surprised to that something I thought would have worked didn't work, or they had like different opinions to it. I just can't think of an example on top of my head.
I think of one. We talked about this one before, where like the bottom nav bar, right, that bottom tab bar, we were always picturing that people would be using that and kind of bouncing around the different sections of the app, right? So we really had only about 4 or 5 actions. I mean, you can't put 20 actions to that little like tab bar thing at the bottom. So we had everything really figured out. We took a lot of time. We went with a UX UI person. We did actually kind of test it out with people, but I think the problem is that when you test it with somebody, you may give more feedback than what you really should, right? Where you want to let them use the app, let them figure it all out. As opposed to we went up to them, hey, you could do this, you could do that, and kind of show them how it worked, and then they just remembered based on the demo, right? Anyways, what we found out later on was that like we had this section in there where it was like, okay, you can see your points that you've earned. And like how to get to that is you have to go to your profile in order to see all that kind of stuff. And people, no, you could always see your points, but you couldn't see the breakdown. You see the breakdown, you have to use the tab bar at the bottom. Mm-hmm. And so people were actually tapping on the points, the text, right? It was just text, right? They kept tapping on it and saying, well, I cannot see my balance, right? We were just so blown away. And we're like, well, can't you see at the bottom? Yeah. There's a thing. And no, I never thought about that. Actually, one of the other things is like, there's this whole entire idea that you can get an offer, right? The whole entire idea is that you can use your points, you can redeem an offer for something. We had a tab, it said offers on it. They went to the first one and they couldn't figure out how to actually get to the offers. It's like, it says right there, offers. Like, how come you don't see that? But we were surprised, right? Because we were working with a guy who also worked in HSBC, who also was a pretty decent UI UX person. He spent quite a bit of time designing it, thought about it, and it just didn't pan out, right? It happens, right? But now we learned a lot. Oh, they tap on this, they expect this. Okay, we gave it to them. You tap on this, you get this. Okay, we gave it to them again. And then in the end, people didn't have an issue with the app anymore. And they found ways of getting to offers without actually tapping on offers, which is the most surprising part because we actually did put some other shortcut there. So it was just really quite amazing. And also like, we went even farther, right? Where like, once you join an offer, it would actually kind of go back and actually move the tab for you. Like, okay, this offer finally got redeemed, and now we brought you over to where the redemption part of the app is so that you can actually redeem it right then and there. So if like because a lot of people were actually like, they were standing in line to actually get this thing. They had the points for it. They didn't bother to redeem it until they're standing in line. And then like they tapped on it and we didn't actually navigate them to actually the redemption part. And they were like, oh, how do I redeem this? I know I got it. Where is it? But once we added that second part in, like then that also fulfilled the expectation, right?
Yeah. And I bet you were like feeling like surprised, when you found out like, wow, this is actually what they thought and what's happening.
I mean, when you're like, this more than me, right? When you're a UX strategist, you get a whole picture. When you're a developer, you're so in the details and the needs of like all these things you have to implement that you never really think about the big picture is when I do this, I am expecting this. It's just, okay, if the guy taps on this button, he obviously wants to do this action. Not if he taps on this text showing his points, he probably wants to see a breakdown of his points. That's too far of a thought process when you're actually developing and putting in all the details.
Yeah, and sometimes it also happens to me. Like we do this, and then we never expected the users to use it, a different way, right? And that's sort of like the most surprising part when you a lot of times you can think you're right, but you'd be surprised on what the users come back with when you test it with them, and it just goes to show like you should always assume like you always have your assumptions, but test them like they could be wrong anytime.
Yeah, I'm wrong about everything all the time, so it's okay.
It's okay.
No, but yeah, I mean, you never know until you put it in front of people. I think really the last point that you have is probably one of the best ones. No matter how bad you are no matter how bad or how good you are, the ultimate test is, can the user do what they want to do and get it all done? And if not, how can you help them to make that happen? How do you iterate, right?
Yeah. Even even experts get it wrong, right? And it doesn't matter like how, experts can go on debating which they think is better, but until they get it in front of the user and then actually see what the users respond to, like that's the most important part. That's what sort of settles the score sometimes.
I definitely agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so we went through all the tips, right? Which tip do you think are the most, like if we were to pick 2 or 3 tips that you say, okay, if you're going to walk away tonight after listening to this podcast, which 2 or 3 things do you think people should really keep in mind?
I think really like the first one, because let's be obsessed with your users, like go talk to them, and also test it with your users. They're kind of similar in a sense, where testing is more like more focused. And those two, also think about like clear headlines, because then you're starting to think about how you can present things in a way that's easy for the users to understand. So I think those 3. The first 2 are especially important because developers they kind of like to just spend their time building things and not really get the users' feedback. So that's why it's super, super important to get that before you spend hours and hours building and going down a long road and then finding out not what the users actually wanted. And it also comes back to the point of testing too. So I think those are like the really important tips for developers to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that one. I still can't stop thinking about the testing one. That's probably the most important one to me. Definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. So how are you keeping busy these days? You have lots of projects going on, or what's going on in your current?
Yeah. I do have like 1 or 2 projects coming in, so I am keeping busy. And how about you? How about yourself?
That's what we're here to talk about, is that both you and I, we're busy, but we're always hungry for something more, right? We have some availability coming up, and we're actually working together, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think with your skills as a UX strategist and our skills as people who can help implement that UX strategy into a product, we can really build some awesome stuff together.
Absolutely. And I do have sort of like a mini guide for the viewers of this podcast as well, or the listeners. And I talk about like all these UI UX tips, but the reason why they're important is because if you build a product that's good and easy to use and people love it, then there'll be users who are willing to pay you. And when you build a good product, it lessens sort of the impact on support. So I do all in all, like if you care about your experience of your product, the UI UX, you make it easy for the users to love. They'll be the ones who are going to come and pay for your app and use it and be loyal users. And all of this means is like, that's how you build a compelling product for people to use. I do have this sort of like 5-page mini guide. 8-page mini guide on the 5 ways you can increase your SaaS company's product, your revenue and profitability with UX design. And you can get that on my website at andrewou.com/guide.
Yeah. Okay. We can probably try to put that into the notes. We do have, so what I like about our podcast is that we do have returning viewers, and they love to comment, and I love that too. So John Cumming, friend of the show, says design thinking, empathize, define, ideate, is that how you say it? Prototype and test.
Yeah.
That's what the pillars of design thinking is. That correct?
Yeah. Ultimately, like it all comes back to doing that process with the user, right? You're ideating like what the possible solutions are, and then you're going ahead like designing it instead of just building it, and then you're designing it and testing with users, and then you're refining it over and over again. If you have that process down and you follow that process, it will make your project go a lot smoother. You'll save time and money on the long run, and you also build something that your users love. and it's more accurate too.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I like the part that they have tests in there too. It's like, again, most important part.
Yeah.
No matter how much time you spend prototyping, idealizing, empathizing, defining, the ultimate showdown is the test.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Great. The other thing that's actually important too, right? I'm also thinking about like how you can lower, how working with you can help to actually lower people's costs in the long run, right? By kind of, making things more intuitive, right? Well, with using Flutter, you can also help that a lot too, because we had a guest on here from a company called Nubank, which is a pretty big bank in Brazil. And they end up reducing a lot of costs, just by actually using Flutter. And the way that worked is that when you had iOS, your app was like this. When you had Android, your app was like this. And in between different versions, your app was even quite different in between. So, obviously the last one maybe not so easy to fix, but once they use Flutter, they can create one simple UI and actually solve nearly everybody's problem. Because before was, okay, it's not working for you. What version of the app are you using? Are you using Android or iOS? Now it's just, okay, using the app. Okay, no problem. What's the error message you got? Oh, that's what this one means. This one. Okay, we can help you. So that definitely also helped to reduce a lot. So not only can you reduce from working with us, right? Not only can you reduce with your app and how intuitive it is, you can also make even saving more money by actually having an app that works the same across all different platforms.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I also want to mention one point. It's actually sort of like the one Mythbuster that I want to come back to that we forgot to mention. So when it comes to building mobile apps or designing mobile apps, I think, common thinking has been that, you need to follow the Android style guide when you're doing Android, and you need to follow the iOS guidelines when you do iOS, right? Because these conventions have been sort of set for so long and people are so used to it. But I think that, you don't need to follow these native patterns if you don't want to, right? You can simply use like a single design like Flutter. And that in a way is very, very beneficial because you only have to think about one design and you don't have to have like a separate iOS or Android development team. You can just have a like Flutter development team, right? And then it's also easier to maintain the design as well. So you don't have to build out two separate designs. And to sort of add to that, right? If the product works for the user and it's not based on iOS or Android patterns, if you test it and it works with users, then, what's wrong with not following the patterns or conventions set out by Android or iOS, right?
Well, I think the thing is, what I wanted to say is that even though maybe the apps will look the same, like the other thing too that is kind of nice about Flutter is that even though they look and kind of act the same, there's also some small things that are actually done in the background so that you're not totally the same. So one of those is like a list view. When you're scrolling through it, when you reach the end, in Flutter, actually, depending upon which platform you're actually using, you'll actually get more native experience, right? I think I forgot what the difference is. I was trying to look it up on right now. But I think like there's more of a bounce with iOS than opposed to Android or something like that. Or with Android, when you pull up, there's like what they call an inkwell or like a shadow that kind of comes up, as opposed to iOS, which will not have that. So you can still have things look the same, but then just slightly different in just the right spots, right? Not like the shape of a button, but it's actually like it's a little bit of a behavior when you do certain actions.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's fine as well. If you really want to, have that compromise, I guess, between native and hybrid. But I'll also say like, usability should come on top. So in the case of the shadow, right? If the shadow is helping your users better being able to pick out, the different information or the different sections, right? Go with that. Instead of being bounded by, need to sort of follow the native conventions.
Well, I think what this one's talking about is basically when you scroll through a list on iOS version, you scroll through a list on Android, you're expecting different things to let you know that you're actually at the bottom of the list, which is really important, right? Because if you're expecting that shadow and you're on Android and it doesn't have a shadow, then maybe you might be confused whether or not you really actually are at the end of the list.
Yeah, and that's fair too. I would say, yeah, I think so. Again, like if it works for the users, then go for it.
I feel like UX and programming are so similar in the fact where it's like, well, there's no real true answer. It's just kind of like whatever works and works for that particular use case is the correct answer.
Yeah, and there's so many of that. Like there's a million ways to do things, and they're all like right and wrong, but depending on the context as well.
Great. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we sign off?
No, I think we covered quite a lot in this session.
Yeah, we did, and I really love that you brought those 6 tips in, and I think they're clear enough that people can actually implement them, and they're not too distinct that people will not try to get bogged down in saying, okay, does this fit these criteria so that I can do it, right? It's just really like, okay, think about these things and act properly. And I think that guide that you're offering to us, I think will be really great for people so they can actually get more of an idea about how they can do better at UX. And if they wanted to get even more information, we can definitely reach out to you, right? Yeah,
definitely.
Okay. Well, Andrew, it's great having you on. And it's nice that, you're not too far away from me, basically, right? So I'm in Hong Kong, you're in Taiwan for the time being, at least.
Yeah, not at the moment,
so I hope you enjoy your time over there. You stay safe.
Yeah, I'll be heading back in June. And thanks for, hosting this show. Definitely like hearing your perspectives as well. And it was a fun conversation.
You're just surprised by all the weird stories I have when I'm making all the different apps.
Yeah. And I like the one, with the testing, the personal experience that you experience when it comes to testing too.
Oh, what do you mean? Which part about the testing?
Like the one where you were surprised how the users reacted to the app.
Oh yeah, I don't know why I get surprised anymore. After a while, I have stuff like this happen all the time. I don't know why I get surprised as it is always something happening. All right. Again, thank you for your time. Maybe we'll do another session pretty soon. And if you got some more tips and tricks for to hand out to people.
Sounds good. Awesome.
Oh, sorry. Let me just have one last shout out, right? So if you guys are looking for more some UX help to make your app even better, definitely reach out to andrewou. And he's easily accessible on LinkedIn. I think you never sleep, and you're always up every time I'm up, which is like about 12 or 18 hours difference or something. And if you guys are looking for some help on actually implementing those UX tips from Andrew, go ahead and reach out to us at Plangora, PLANGORA.com. Plangora is the main sponsor of the show, and we are definitely Flutter experts. And with Andrew O's help, we can hopefully be known as implementing great UX within Flutter apps.
Yeah, sounds good. And my website is andrewou.com, ANDREWOU.com.
All right, awesome. Thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, thanks. And have a nice day.
Yeah.
Or evening.